Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG Public Media, TV, radio, online. News that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Up front this week, El Paso Congressman Beto O'Rourke garnered widespread media attention during his campaign for U.S. Senate in the 2018 midterm elections. At a recent town hall meeting, O'Rourke spoke about his plans for the rest of his term and left the door open for another run for office. Michael Hernandez reports.
Texas Representative Beto O'Rourke lost the Senate race to incumbent Senator Ted Cruz by just 2.5% of the vote. More than 4 million Texans voted for him, and that's led to widespread speculation about his future. O'Rourke said multiple times during his campaign he would not seek the presidency in 2020. Yet at his first town hall meeting since the elections, he changed his answer and said he's not ruling anything out.
I'm really focused on my family right now, focused on finishing out this job strong in the next 4 weeks that I have left on my term, and then after that, we'll see what comes.
So it's not out of the question.
Yeah, I don't think we're ruling anything out, and we're not really we haven't gotten past just focusing on our family and being together and enjoying that.
More than 100 people filled the downtown El Paso Community Foundation room to hear O'Rourke speak about his goals before his term ends. He addressed immigration issues including the migrant caravan, children detained in Tornillo's tent city, and President Trump's demands to Congress to fund a border wall. In response to Border Patrol agents using tear gas to stop hundreds of migrants from rushing the border at the San Ysidro port of entry in Tijuana, O'Rourke says immigration officials need to increase their capacity at ports of entry to process asylum seekers.
Yeah, we need to increase our capacity at ports of entry to allow asylum seekers to lawfully petition for asylum, which is all that they are trying to do. When you're only processing between 40 to 100 applications with more than 5,000 people waiting for over 10 days in squalid conditions, you're going to produce the kind of desperation that we saw yesterday. This country has the capacity to follow our international obligations and our own laws, which we are so far refusing to do.
Additionally, O'Rourke says his priorities until his term ends in January include veterans issues and avoiding a federal government shutdown.
Make sure that we focus on access to the VA, the ability to go to college on your post 9/11 GI Bill benefit, addressing issues of veterans homelessness. It remains a top priority for me. I want to make sure that we use our position as one of the largest binational communities in the world to lead on bilateral U.S.-Mexico issues, on immigration, on border security. I want to make sure that we have funding for the government and that we meet our responsibilities to deliver on our commitments to one another, and that we don't allow partisanship or anything else to get in the way of delivering for one another.
During his grassroots campaign, O'Rourke visited all 254 Texas counties and raised more than $70 million, an all-time record. O'Rourke remains a crowd favorite among Democrats who want him to run for the White House. Among them are author and former police officer Ron Stallworth, whose memoir Black Klansman was recently made into a movie by director Spike Lee. Wearing a Beto for Senate t-shirt, Stallworth attended the Q&A to ask O'Rourke about the economic impact of General Motors' recent decision to lay off 14,000 workers and Russia's seizure of Ukrainian ships. Stallworth says he doesn't expect much from O'Rourke during the remainder of his lame duck term and is ready to support him in a bid for president.
I will do everything I possibly can to get him elected, and I'm hoping he runs for president. And if not, I hope somebody puts him on as their vice presidential candidate. We need people like Beto O'Rourke in this country. He's refreshing, he's the real deal, he is not a phony, and he is truly concerned about the needs of the people of his constituency, unlike what we have in the White House today. We need somebody like him, and he will have all the support that I can possibly give him when that time comes.
Representative-elect Veronica Escobar, a former El Paso County commissioner and judge, will take over O'Rourke's 16th congressional district seat. Escobar says while she's very excited and grateful to represent El Paso, O'Rourke's departure is bittersweet for her.
He was a fantastic member of Congress. I had hoped he would be our senator. And so I'm still heartbroken about the loss and heartbroken that he will not be our U.S. Senator, but I have faith that there's something bigger and better on the horizon for him. He's just too good of a public servant, too devoted and genuine and honest and hardworking. We can't lose him as a public servant for this country, and I have faith that something good will come up.
And if the continued encouragement of crowds like this are any indication, Escobar's prediction might be a good bet. For KRWG Public Media, I'm Michael Hernandez.
Hello and welcome to In Focus. I'm Anthony Moreno. Our guest today is Lori Martinez, who serves as Executive Director for Ngage New Mexico. Martinez joins us to share more about our organization and how it is working to improve education results in Doña Ana County. Thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Could you start off by sharing a little bit more about your mission and what Ngage does?
Sure. Well, the mission of Ngage is actually really broad. For short, we like to say we engage community to make change happen. But our, kind of approved mission is to serve as the catalyst for the advancement of all people of southern New Mexico, and that's a pretty broad mission. So we have our defined focus right now is really on education and improving education outcomes from prenatal through career in Doña Ana County, and that is through the Success Partnership.
Tell me a little bit more about the Success Partnership.
Okay. So the Success Partnership was formed really in 2013. My predecessor, Frank Lopez, was the executive director of Ngage New Mexico at the time. And what happened at the time was a really large group of stakeholders in Doña Ana County came together. And so this was, people already working in education, people working in the nonprofit community, people in the faith community, elected officials, people in the business community, really looking at what is one area that we can tackle in our county to really make a difference. And so they settled on education, and they also settled on a framework that's called collective impact. And so collective impact, if you've never heard of it, when people hear what it is, most people say, well, isn't that just common sense? And in an ideal world, yes, it would be. But at its core, collective impact is about taking any given area you want to tackle, whether it's homelessness or poverty or education, and tackling it in a more coordinated, aligned fashion than how we tend to do. So, for example, we've done a lot of work in the Success Partnership. The bulk of the work so far has been done in early childhood. And I know when I worked in early childhood for about 9 years in Doña Ana County. And at the time, a lot of the early childhood providers, we just were not great about working and playing well together. And so we might participate in some similar events or do some kind of collaboration that was real surface level, but there was no real deep collaboration. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but collective impact at its core is about getting a lot of organizations, people, and stakeholders out of their silos and getting them moved in the same direction together. And one of the things that collective impact calls for is a backbone organization. And so Ngage is the backbone or the primary support organization of the Success Partnership. And what that means is that we are the conveners, we're the logistics people, we're the coordinators, we're the ones whose job it is to do all of that. And that's important because a lot of times when you take some of these big social issues, and you might be able to get people aligned at first, but when you look at, for example, again, just our early childhood providers in the community, they all have their own jobs, right? They have their jobs providing home visiting or early intervention or pre-K or Head Start. And so they might have the desire to be involved in an effort like this that's coordinated on a community level, but may not necessarily have the time or the ability to do that. It would be extra, right? And so it's our job to take that on.
Now, I mean, the things you brought up are obviously very challenging because New Mexico isn't doing very well when it comes to child well-being.
We're at 50th in the nation.
Last in the nation. That is according to the Kids Count profile from New Mexico, Voices for Children. New Mexico ranks last in child well-being. You were mentioning early childhood education. 57% of young children are not in early childhood education. That's 52% below the national average, I believe, or
I don't actually know what the national average is off the top of my head, but what we do know, because in the state and also in our county, because Engage's focuses on Doña Ana County, is that we know that there are about 15,000 children under 5 in our county, and that the bulk of them are not getting any kind of high quality early childhood education. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Some families don't want their kids involved in programs. A lot of families do, but they don't have the means, so they either can't afford them or they can't access them because of transportation. And then we do have some, subsidized, really high quality early childhood programs like Head Start, like pre-K. But there are a number of barriers that really stand in the way of families being able to access those.
Let's talk about some of those barriers. Is it just a capacity issue?
It's a capacity issue. The thing is, there's, these problems we have in New Mexico, it's not just one cause, and it's not just going to be one solution that gets us out of it either. And so some of the barriers are affordability. Some of them are location and transportation. Some are just those really on the ground, day in and day out realities that our families face. And so if you live in, one of the rural areas of the county like Chaparral or Berrino or, what have you, there may not necessarily be an early childhood provider close to you. So that's one reason. There are some childcare centers that are really great, but families might not be able to afford them. Yeah. And we have childcare subsidies in our state, but they only help a certain subsection of our families. And so if you're not at 150% of the poverty level or less, if you're just over that, but still struggling to make ends meet, you're not going to be able to access programs like that. We also have there's people, I think, who don't understand really the importance of the early years on a child's life. Because what we don't want people to misunderstand is that we're not advocating that necessarily every child needs to be in a classroom from birth on. That's not, some families don't want that, ultimately what we're advocating for is that every child from the moment they're born has what they need to really develop optimally. And so much of that is done through relationships. And so when we talk about quality early childhood programs, it also has to do with equipping parents and making sure that parents have everything they need.
That seems like a big challenge here in New Mexico. I mean, because there are a number of children whose parents are lacking secure employment. There's a number of children who may not have both parents involved in their lives. So I would imagine overcoming those barriers and challenges would be something that is a challenge for organizations like you and people working in policy to really address this.
Yeah, it is. And there are a lot of complexities that happen in our county. So we have, even just in the immigration arena, we have families that have mixed status. And so if you have, someone in the family, parents who are undocumented, but their children are citizens or have DACA, then, they might be afraid to have a home visitor come into their home and talk to them about how can they be, really in a better place to support their children. Or they might be afraid to leave their homes and take their kids to a child care center where if they think they're going to get reported. And that's just one issue.
Is that an issue that's really prevalent here now, or is it just a recent issue, or is it something that's always been ongoing?
I think it's always been something we need to be aware of. The thing is, what a lot of people don't realize about a lot of these programs is that most of them don't ask about immigration status. So for example, if you're getting early intervention services for kids, birth to 3, they don't ask about immigration. They don't ask about citizenship status. And so it's not required in order to access the service. So I think it's become more of an issue lately because of how divisive that particular issue has become in our country. And then here on the borderland, we see the effects, I think, of that, or I think we feel that in a more keen way than maybe people who live in other areas of the country. So it's relevant. It's always been relevant, I think, to people who have worked in early childhood, but it's just been more, I think, on the national and statewide radar now than maybe it has been in the past.
I see. What about just having high quality childhood education, early childhood education? How is Doña Ana County doing?
Well, we have a lot of great programs that people don't know about. So when we talk about quality early childhood education programs, that could be everything from classroom settings like pre-K or like Head Start. It can also mean things like early intervention, where you have, physical and speech therapists and young teachers going to the home, where the philosophy is you work with parents kids in the community setting where they're more likely to be anyway, and then the changes are more likely to stick. We also have these amazing programs like Children's Reading Alliance, who do their 6-week-long parent education courses that really teach parents how to interact with their children and how to, how to read to them and what a difference that makes. And so a lot of it is about, or can be about supporting parents so that they can be in a place to really support their children, because you have 80% of brain development that takes place from birth to age 3. So it's a really crucial window to make sure that kids have as good a start as they possibly can get. And so with Ngage and our early childhood partners, what we're advocating for is that every child should have that kind of start and have that kind of opportunity. And so for one family, that might look like having their child in a pre-K or Head Start classroom. For another child, that might look different. But the common denominator is that every child should have those opportunities and based on that family's needs.
One of the things that you've done recently is build partnerships within statewide organizations like New Mexico Voices for Children. Recently in Las Cruces, you partnered with that organization on the Southern New Mexico Kids Count Conference. Could you share with us a little bit about that conference and what the theme for that conference was?
Sure. Well, I have to give a lot of credit to New Mexico Voices for Children, because Voices has been in New Mexico for over 30 years advocating for children at the policy level. So they specialize in policy. And so they do a Kids Count conference every year that focuses on issues of relevance to our kids in New Mexico. But they also run a lot of data. So when you hear about data from the Kids Count, Data Center and data on child well-being, that's usually them who's behind it. But we partnered with them starting last year to run a Southern New Mexico version of that conference, because we wanted to be able to focus on what's really relevant here in our neck of the woods. And so last year we focused on early childhood, and this year we focused on childhood trauma for a number of reasons, but we wanted to tackle it from kind of a two-pronged approach. And that was really looking at our society is kind of warming up to the idea of even being able to talk about trauma. We tend to ignore it or avoid it or just not deal with it.
There could be stigmas with it.
Lots of stigma, yeah. And I think too, just a lot of lack of awareness about how does trauma and adverse childhood experiences, how do those things affect us on a daily basis? Because in a lot of ways we're blind to it. And so, if a child has had a number of adverse childhood experiences, that gives them more risk factors for things that are more difficult later in life. So they're just at higher risk in general. And so we wanted to tackle this conference from the kind of what we would probably call the more clinical approach, and that's looking at what is trauma? What do we mean when we talk about trauma? And what are ACEs? And what are the symptoms? How do you identify them? How do you treat it? What are really kind of trauma-informed practices? What are the best practices and ways to deal with trauma? And then also to apply the policy lens to it. And so the reason we had both of those is because they go together. You want your decision makers and elected officials to understand certain things about trauma so that when it comes time for them to pass laws, they make good decisions based on what we know from the research and what we know are considered best practices. And so we wanted to really attract a wide spectrum of people to this conference. So people working in mental health already, certainly in education, but also people in the medical field, people in law enforcement, our elected officials, and just have a large group and community advocates and parents and et cetera. And we wanted to attract a large group of people just to come and sit and learn and have these conversations and really just put that on the forefront. And so that was what we aimed to do.
So what do you feel that was really presented at this conference that allowed organizations and people who are really involved in those issues in the community, in educational success and quality of life here in Doña Ana County, what were your hopes that they were able to really take away from that conference? We just have about a minute left. So.
Sure. Well, a few things. We wanted people, number one, just to talk about it, because as you mentioned, there's such a stigma around it. We wanted to have that conversation brought to the forefront. We want people to understand that they are more than the worst things that ever happened to them, and that there's a way through it, and that resilience and hope are real. We wanted people to have tools that they could take with them, really tangible tools that they could take with them, and we wanted them to hear some ideas about policies that we could really start to be involved in, and just to start tossing around those ideas and to think about trauma from that angle.
You come from an extensive social work background. I'm just curious, what really attracted you to this organization and this position?
That's a good question. I did early childhood for about 9 years and then kind of hopscotched over to the higher ed end of the spectrum and did that for about 9 years too. And really loved the work. But I think the more I got in it, the more I saw and continued to see the need for things to shift on a systems level. And that's what Ngage does. You know, we don't do direct services. We're all on kind of the meso and macro lens, and so it's all systems work. And I guess my hope is just that having done the direct practice work for so many years, that we can keep our ears to the ground and really listen to our community and make those changes on the macro and meso scale the way our community tells us they need to be made.
Okay. Lori Martinez, Executive Director of Ngage New Mexico, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And we want to thank you for joining us for In Focus. I'm Anthony Moreno.
The Doña Ana County Board of County Commissioners has unanimously passed a resolution supporting a Medicaid buy-in option for New Mexico residents. Michael Hernandez reports.
Doña Ana County joins Bernalillo and McKinley counties, the Albuquerque City Council, and a handful of other municipalities in New Mexico that have already adopted Medicaid buy-in resolutions this year. The federally supported program provides health coverage to low-income residents. Organizers from the New Mexico Together for Healthcare campaign, a statewide coalition of families and organizations, presented the resolution to the county's Board of Commissioners at a recent meeting. Abuco Estrada, supervising attorney at the New Mexico Center on Law and Poverty in Albuquerque, says the group is looking to expand Medicaid access to roughly 180,000 New Mexicans without health insurance.
No family should go without health care because they can't afford it. And so what the Medicaid buy-in would do is it would leverage the Medicaid program to offer a plan through the state that people can buy into that's more affordable than private options that are currently available on the marketplace.
State lawmakers passed a memorial during the 2018 legislative session exploring the policy and financial impacts of offering New Mexicans a Medicaid buy-in plan. Nearly 830,000 New Mexicans received Medicaid benefits in September, according to the state's Human Services Department. Estrada says among New Mexico's uninsured residents, about 25,000 live in Doña Ana County.
These include individuals who just can't afford coverage through issues with employer coverage rules under the Affordable Care Act, issues around just being low income and not being able to pay co-pays, deductibles, or maybe even the monthly premiums themselves, as well as individuals who are undocumented and may not have access to care because they're completely locked out of the healthcare system, be it Medicaid or marketplace coverage.
Campaign member and former District 2 County Commissioner David Garcia says between his mother and neighbor, he understands the local need for health care access.
My mother is 89 years old, almost 90, and I know what trials and tribulations she goes with health issues. But I have a neighbor that is about a block away from me, has no running water, lives in a little mobile home, and the other day he had run out of oxygen, and he has no medical coverage insurance. And I say, how could we do better and promote something like Strong Families is doing in promoting something of buy-in for insurance?
District 2 County Commissioner Ramon Gonzalez presented the commission board with details of the resolution before the county passed the proposal. Gonzalez says now it's up to state legislators to draft a bill that will cover people without health care in lower income districts like his.
In my area, we get a lot of poverty, which it comes from Anthony to Chaparral, to Chamberino, to Lañon, Sunland Park, and Anapra, in which I've seen a lot of my constituents unable to go to the doctors because the thing is, they don't have no type of insurance. And that was my concern, is to get my constituents some type of coverage that they will need so they can move forward in their lives. And that's what got me interested in this.
Estrada says one of the main barriers to individuals getting coverage under the Affordable Care Act has been affordability. Healthcare was also a key talking point for politicians during the 2018 midterm elections.
In fact, you saw with the most recent election in a poll that was done that 77% of New Mexicans said that affordability of co-pays, premiums, and deductibles were a huge issue for them in voting in the elections. And so the Medicaid buy-in plan is an innovative solution that can address that and provide quality, affordable health care to every New Mexican.
Outgoing Governor Susana Martinez expanded Medicaid in New Mexico under the Affordable Care Act in 2013. Since then, the uninsured rate in New Mexico has dropped by more than half, from 382,000 people in 2013 to 187,000 in 2017, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. For KRWG Public Media, I'm Michael Hernandez.
That's our time for now. Join us this week on KRWG Radio. Every weekday, it's Morning Edition 5 to 9, Fresh Air at 11, followed by Here and Now, noon to 2, and All Things Considered, 4 to 7. KRWG News is always online at krwg.org, and we'd love to hear from you. Email us with your story ideas and video submissions. The address is feedback@nmsu.edu. For all of us at KRWG News, I'm Fred Martino. Have a great week. We'll see you next time on Newsmakers.